What is up, y'all? How's it going? All right. So I'm going live a little bit later than I planned, but I'm actually kind of glad about it because if you saw the thumbnail, like some interesting news came out about Jimmy Johnson, right? And what's funny about that is that when I saw the tweet, like if you follow me on Twitter, I retweeted something about it. And I saw that tweet at a time when I was already supposed to be live. I was already supposed to be doing this. But as I talk to y'all about all the time, life as a personal trainer, clients move stuff around. So I ended up having to like push back my live later than I expected. And so I was actually planning on talking about something kind of related but different. But then I saw that and I was like, I looked into it a little bit and I was like, okay, we need to talk about this. People have questions. People are interested in this. So I'm like, I switched it all up. I was like, I got to change the thumbnail. I got to change the notes. So I'm ready to talk about it. I do want to get to some other stuff first. It's going to be a really quick show because like we don't need to get into it, but it's not going to be like a super long show, probably like an hour or less. But yeah, we're definitely going to talk about this Jimmy Johnson news because it's got the Twitter streets a buzz and some other streets apparently as well. But before we get into that, what's up? This is another episode of Bitches Love Sports. I'm your host, Jazz Monet. As promised, I am trying to go live more often this week. And I'm gonna be honest, it's only Monday and I'm already exhausted. So we'll see how this goes. But I do plan on keeping that promise to y'all at least for a week. So I don't have a ton of notes here because it's a short show, but I do want to start off with a few quick shout outs and call outs before we get into the topic of the day. So, my first shout out goes to all the players participating in the HBCU Combine. So, that was something else that was kind of a surprise to me today. And I say this because last week, literally, like actually less than a week ago, it was last Tuesday, I was talking with some folks and we were trying to figure out when the HBCU Combine was happening. And all three of us were literally on Google trying to find dates, times, broadcasting information, and we could find nothing. We found information about the Legacy Bowl, which is basically like the HBCU version of the Senior Bowl, that's supposed to be happening this weekend. We found that, right? But we couldn't find anything about the HBCU Combine. And I'm like, I know it happens every year. What's going on? Is it going to be before the regular Combine, after? We couldn't figure it out. Then all of a sudden, got home this morning, had some morning clients, got home later than expected. I turned on YouTube TV and it's like, oh, hey, you want to watch the HBCU Combine? It's on NFL Network. And I'm like, oh, now you tell me. So then I Google it again and I'm seeing stories like on Google, it shows you the time. And it's like, yeah, 5 hours ago, it was announced. And I'm like, you motherfuckers better not have just started advertising this shit today. Um, and then somebody sent me a message and they were like, I hate to talk about us bad, like, us being us. And they're like, but this just feels really impromptu. Why we couldn't get indoor facilities? And they were like, I know this probably wasn't planned last minute, but it just looks like it. And I was just like, look, real talk, we were looking for information about this. And like the Legacy Bowl was already supposed to be hosted by the New Orleans Saints. So I would bet money that they already knew the combine was supposed to be hosted in New Orleans, but they either couldn't find sponsors or money to have like better facilities, or they just really waited to the last minute to get something done. But um I'm gonna be honest, I was watching the footage today, and the reason why I'm not naming any players in particular is because I didn't get to watch the whole thing. I set it to record because if you watch NFL Network, sometimes like they'll like late at night replay stuff that they showed during the day. So I'm hoping I'll get a full recording of the entire combine and be able to talk about some standout names for you guys. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if things came together last minute. And it did kind of look like it was in somebody's backyard being recorded with an iPhone. And that is also something that we're going to talk about later, is just the quality of that production or the lack thereof, and just how, if I'm being honest, kind of fucked up it is. But yeah, so shout out to the players who were there. I heard school names as far as like FAMU, Grambling, Southern. So shout out to all those guys. I hope they had a great time at the HBCU Combine. A few of them at least put up a good showing. So at least there's that. But when it comes to marketing, promotion, acknowledgement, attention, yeah, I props to the NFL for hosting it, for putting it on NFL Network. But honestly, we got to do better. And it's Black History Month. I might have to do a deep dive into some of the things that like as far as the history between the NFL and just black players in general, because like things have gotten better, but like there's just a history of, like, if I'm being honest, just like racism and discrimination, and honestly some really fucked up policies. And I talk to people about these things, and people will be like, well, how do you still support the NFL? And I'm like, look, let's be real. I am a black woman in America. Like, I have had to get used to being a part of systems and places and events that have roots in misogyny and racism. Otherwise, I wouldn't even be able to get out of bed. I wouldn't even be able to lay in my bed. Like, where the fuck would I go? So at some point, you just have to be like, all right, we're just gonna like acknowledge the past, but we gotta move forward. You know what I'm saying? So that's that. So shout out to those players. Um, and if you are interested in watching the HBCU Legacy Bowl this weekend, it will be this Saturday at 3 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Eastern. It will also be broadcast on NFL Network. So go ahead and set your DVRs and plan your schedules around that. Should be good. Next shout out goes to LeBron James for a record number of All-Star Game appearances. So I'm gonna tell y'all a secret. The reason why I mess up my words so much is because I have an earbud in my ear to make sure that my sound doesn't go out, because it does all the time. And so it's like an echo, and it's distracting, if I'm being honest. But shout out to LeBron James for a record number of All-Star Game appearances. It only serves to reason that eventually he would break this record, because he just been in the NBA longer than anybody. But I guess at this point in his life, a lot of people would have expected him to fall off and no longer be All-Star worthy, maybe. From hearing the way people have been talking about this, it sounds like it's the case. But he's still there. He's still in the All-Star game. He's still dunking. So good for him. Now, speaking of NBA All-Star Weekend, I got to call out the NBA for just having a terrible All-Star game. I feel like the NBA has had plenty of time to figure out how to make this a more competitive game, a more interesting game for onlookers. And if I'm being honest, I didn't even watch the All-Star game. Like, I didn't even try to. I watched other things. Like, I watched the skills competition. I watched the slam dunk contest. Um, and if we're being honest, all of it is kind of lackluster. But I did watch those things. The celebrity game was a lot of fun. The celebrity game was really interesting. And maybe it's because they have so many. It's like if you watch it, there's like all kinds of games within the game that happen as the game is going on. So it just keeps it interesting. And then plus you get to watch these celebrities do things you don't normally get to see. Like, honestly, seeing Micah Parsons and Puka Nacua and CJ Stroud play basketball against each other might have been one of the highlights of my weekend. So overall, not bad programming for the weekend, but like the game itself, like what was the final score? Like 186 to 211. That is crazy. That is like zero defense whatsoever. And I get not going super hard, like it's game 7 of the playoffs, but like, can y'all act like and by y'all, I mean NBA players, can you act like you're a little bit interested? Can you act like you have like a little bit of pride that you're playing for it? Like just a little bit. Like, can you act like you give a fuck about the fans? Just a little bit. Um, so shout out to LeBron calling out the NBA. And on that note, I do want to shout out Micah Parsons, and I'm gonna bring up this video of some of his highlights from the weekend. Because he had a good time on All-Star Weekend. He scored 37 points in the Celebrity All-Star Game, and if I'm being honest, like I like watching the players have fun in the off season. Like, I know some people are like, how dare they go and have fun at the All-Star game and at the Pro Bowl when they did not win the Super Bowl or make it to the Super Bowl? And I'm kind of like, there's nothing we can really do about it at this point. So if they need to like decompress during the off season, go to the Pro Bowl, go to the NBA All-Star Weekend and have a good time before they, have to get back to work at OTAs and whatnot. All right, let them have fun for a couple of weekends. Like, it's not that big a deal. Plus, I actually love these players. I like seeing them do well. But yeah, we got to see Micah Dunk score 37 points. We got to see him drive down the lane. We got to see his mid-range game. He did not have a long-range game. So we'll see if he develops that for next year. But, I was pretty impressed with his performance myself. So, shout out to him. Rick Rodman said, it's still better than the NFL Pro Bowl. I won't argue with you there. As a matter of fact, I think that's another reason the NFL went to the whole flag football thing, is because they were like, all right, these players are not going to really put any kind of effort into a football game. We might as well just make it something else. And if we're being honest about the NFL Pro Bowl, the flag football itself, I'm not really big on. But the way they have like some of the competition games in between the quarters of the flag football game, I think that's kind of cool. But like I said, I like watching these players have fun. Like it's interesting to me. It's interesting seeing their dynamic. So it's all good in my opinion. Um, Let me give a quick shout out to all the people who said hi to me in the chat. What's up, J Money? Good to see you. Hey, Clement, glad you're here. Looking forward to your comments today. Cole's Cowboys, another good follow, another good subscription on YouTube. Common Sense Lab, how's it going? Rick, how's it going? Let me get this video off the screen and get back to this next topic. Wait, real quick. Clement says, didn't waste my time watching the All-Star game and activities. The result of the game yesterday was a disgrace. Maybe home court advantage for the conference and the NBA finals. You know what? That's not a bad idea. A lot of the morning shows today were like, how can we make this more competitive? I don't know if home court advantage might actually be higher stakes than money. Like, that would be a pretty big deal. Like, we might see players play super hard for that. That would be something. I don't even think they would approve that for that reason, honestly. I think players would honestly be too, I'll go ahead and say it. They'd be too afraid to like have that on the line. I think players like having that end of the season to like get their home court situation in order. But not a bad idea to have some sort of like playoff benefit, especially considering that most of the All-Star players do end up in the playoffs. So interesting ideas. Good thoughts. All right. So let's get into some of the Cowboys topics. I am going to talk about the Jimmy Johnson thing, but I want to bring up some of the topics that I already had planned because they're all kind of related. Some of them I did have to cut out. Like, I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into Micah Parsons' conversation with Stephen A. Smith. And that's something that we might get into tomorrow for a couple of reasons. One, like I said, this is a short episode, and some of it I do want to address. I do want to give Micah a shout out for actually doing a good job of defending Dak, which we'll get into in a second. But also, I'm hearing other people's takes and perspectives on the conversation. And so there are a couple of other things that I want to address that I didn't originally plan to address. So we might get into that tomorrow, like do a little bit of a watch along, like how we do sometimes. I'll pick out some clips and we'll kind of do a deep dive into some of Micah's statements because he did say some good things. And if you watch my last episode where I went live, I was really concerned about Micah Parsons debating Stephen A. Smith, especially on the topic of Dak Prescott, because when Stephen A. went on Micah's show, they kind of got into that discussion, and honestly, it looked like it was going to be ugly for Micah. It was not going well. And then the producers were like, okay, time's up. And I felt like Micah was saved by the bell. But it looked like Micah did his homework, got his arguments prepared, realized who he was dealing with. And I think he actually did a really good job of defending Dak in terms of presenting numbers, comparing Dak situationally, not just comparing him to certain names, because you really can't put anybody in a conversation with Patrick Mahomes. And not just because of the fact that he's such a clutch player, but like as a personal trainer, even looking at Patrick Mahomes' mechanics, just the way he moves as a player, his decision making is so different. Nobody's in that conversation. So making that comparison, you are never going to win that argument, ever. But I think Micah did a really good job of just saying, like, look, this is what Dak has done in these particular situations. This is what he does when his defense is performing. Like, these are all the reasons why you can't blame all the failures of the Cowboys on him. And I felt like he did a really good job of shutting down Stephen A's usual arguments. So shout out to Micah Parsons for that. Like, I feel like he really crushed the conversation from that perspective. Now, a lot of people are taking issue with some of the things he said about D-Law. Now, I'll give y'all a little preview for tomorrow. I don't think his comments were as detrimental as some people are making it seem. I don't think he was taking shots at D-Law. But we're going to get more into detail into that tomorrow. Today, what I want to talk about is Micah Parsons and his comments about the culture and about leadership. And the reason why I want to discuss that is because so many people seem to have received his words negatively. And my thing about it is this. Yes, Micah Parsons, in terms of years in the NFL, he's still relatively new as a player. There's a lot he hasn't experienced. He's only been on one team. He hasn't even been through a full round of contract negotiations yet, right? In the sense that he doesn't have his new contract. Those numbers have not been decided. So there are so many things that he simply has not experienced in order to really be able to call himself a leader, in order to really be able to call himself someone that other players should look up to or look to for advice. It's like you just need a little bit more time, a little bit more experience, right? However, I feel like he's on the right track in the sense that he's acknowledging that things need to be different and he's taking some level of accountability and responsibility. And I want to juxtapose that with comments made by Emmitt Smith for a couple of reasons. One, on Twitter, there were mixed reactions when I said that I didn't like the fact, hey JV, how's it going? I said that I didn't like the fact that Emmitt Smith was doing a lot of complaining about the Cowboys and a lot of criticism of the Cowboys and wasn't offering a lot of solutions, right? And there were a lot of people in my replies who were like, it's Emmitt Smith. He can say whatever he wants. Of course he can. He's a fucking legend. He's done so much for the Cowboys. I'll never deny that. Like the Dallas Cowboys, the legacy of the Dallas Cowboys would not be what it is if not for Emmitt Smith. I'm not trying to take that away from him. However, the same way he can say whatever he wants, people are going to respond. People can respond. And, if he were talking strictly about running backs in the NFL, their treatment, their work ethic, so on and so forth, I would probably have nothing to say. And he did comment on that a little bit. And I have nothing to say about what he said about that. As a matter of fact, I agree with him and everything he said about the state of running backs in the NFL and Christian McCaffrey and all that. Cool. But when it comes to the way he's criticizing modern Cowboys, the current Cowboys roster, I should say, I still do really wish that he would offer something tangible in terms of help, advice, assistance, whatever. And I say that because I'm a person who sometimes people like to give me feedback, right? And the way my anxiety is set up, if you have any sort of like criticism, critique, feedback from me, it's probably something that I'm already anxious about and or something that I'm already beating myself up about if it's something bad, right? And so if you come to me and you're just like, hey, you need to do better at XYZ, I might be like, okay, what do you have in mind? And if you don't have anything to offer in terms of that, I'm gonna be like, okay, well, thanks for taking the time. However, your feedback is not really useful to me. And I feel like that's where the Cowboys are, because if you listen to Micah Parsons and you listen to Emmitt Smith, essentially they're saying the same thing. That's why it's so weird to me that so many people have a problem with Micah Parsons talking, but they're okay with Emmitt Smith talking, because they're both acknowledging that there's a need for more discipline, there's a need for more accountability, there's a need for somewhat of a culture shift. Like, they agree on that. So why do you have a problem with Micah but not with Emmitt Smith? However, when it comes to Micah, although I do think he could benefit from a little bit of guidance and a little bit more of a plan, at least he's saying that he's trying to do something. At least he's mentioned a few different starting points in terms of what he plans to do differently and what he plans to change. Emmitt, on the other hand, has been all criticism and no solutions, which is just not helpful at this point. And that was something that actually came up on Get Up this morning that I do want to do a little bit of a watch along with you guys on. Now, I noticed when I tried to pull it up that StreamYard wouldn't let me load the clip. So I tried to pull it into Google Drive. So I'm going to see real quick if it'll let me play it. So give me 1 second and we'll see. Nope, not that one. Give me 1 second. We'll see if it'll let me play it. And maybe I can share it through my Google Drive and we can still watch it together. And JV, I do agree that it's selective hearing, honestly. I think that there's some people who just since the beginning of the season have not liked that Micah Parsons has a podcast. They don't like that he's on social media. And so anything that he says, they're like, he needs to stop talking. He's talking too much. He's doing too much talking. And somebody over the weekend, and I literally laughed out loud when I read this tweet, and I might find it and pull it up for you guys, but they made the point that they were like, yo, the Cowboys in the 90s were out here like doing drugs, having like all kinds of indiscriminate sex parties in the White House, and people today are like making a big deal about a podcast. It wasn't their exact words, but that was essentially their point. Like, yo, let's not talk like, the Cowboys culture of today is so terrible when they were out here like having orgies and doing cocaine. like when we talk about shenanigans and distractions, that pretty much takes the cake. All right. Do-do-do. No, that's not it. I think I uploaded the wrong thing. Okay, so give me 1 second. I'm gonna try uploading the right thing, and then we'll have a chat about this clip of Micah Parsons. It's gonna take it a second. JP said he saw that tweet too. While we're waiting for this video to upload, actually, I'm gonna find that tweet for you guys so that we can look at it together. Hopefully it's in my bookmarks or something and I can get to it quickly. If not, it might be one of the last things I posted because I haven't really been posting a lot lately. Here it is. I got a lot of tabs open, so hopefully this doesn't freeze on me. But here's the tweet. And I said I literally laughed out loud at. It's Just B with He Said What Sports. And he said, yeah, I mean, Belichick is the most buttoned up head coach we've seen this generation. And without a QB or skill players, we've seen the results. Facts. And by the way, the Cowboys were snorting drugs, having sex at stash houses, and had a violent and crazy man in Charles Haley leading the defense. And so this was in response to just a conversation that we were having on Twitter about the cultural issues and disciplinary issues with today's Cowboys roster. And he was pretty much like, yo, like, why are we getting on Micah about a podcast when we had these guys out here doing literally illegal shit in the 90s? JV said, don't forget the alleged stab in the neck haircut. Oh my goodness. There are so many things, but yes, like literal, like actual criminal behavior. Like not long ago, we cut one of our best hopes at linebacker Evans for marijuana possession. And we had dudes like knowingly doing cocaine, committing crimes, stabbing people, like all sorts of like murderous like acts of violence. And people are like, I can't believe Micah Parsons is doing a weekly podcast. What the hell is this? Just like, really? Really? So maybe if Micah would like stab somebody and then they get to the Super Bowl, all would be forgiven. Oh my goodness. Let me see if this video is up. I'm just imagining people like Micah Parsons literally stabbing somebody and people being like, well, at least he's not doing that podcast anymore. Dwayne Brown said DQ didn't want Evans. Dwayne, I actually agree with you because before the whole marijuana thing, Evans was killing it when he was on the field, but he was hardly ever on the field and it did not make sense. All right, so let's see if we can pull up this video and if stream. It's not going to play, you guys. My last hope is to. I can try to download it on my phone, save it. I can try to download it on my phone and save it, or I can just try to pull it up on YouTube TV. You might try that. I just know on YouTube TV, it might lag a little bit because #bandwidth. But I really want to talk to you guys about what they were saying. And if it doesn't work, then I'll just have to, talk to you guys in my own words and do a little recap. And yes, Bart Scott was one of the people involved in this conversation. All right. I think I got it pulled up to the point right before they started this conversation. So let's talk about it. I'm going to share my screen and we will discuss what they had to say. All right, got that pulled up. We're going to fix this. And we're going to go back to where the fuck did the tab go? There we go. All right, let's listen.
But that's nothing against Micah or against Mike Zimmer. The last time a defensive player won MVP was 13 years before Micah Parsons was born. and that was Lawrence Taylor. It just doesn't happen. I think he could be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate under probably almost any defensive coordinator. He's that good. I'm more interested to see what happens with Micah Parsons this year. Do they work on extending him? Do they let him go into next year without the extension? And how much do they want to commit to him long term? I think those are the questions we have to answer about Micah Parsons. I'm not at all concerned about how well he will play.
Why didn't y'all produce me with the linebacker question?
Because
Raj, we had to get
how much better could you have been than you were on Dak?
Oh, that's true.
There you go. By the way, Parsons was on Stephen A. Smith's show over the weekend. He addressed his teammate DeMarcus Lawrence's comments of the team being tired during their playoff loss.
Don't get me wrong. Yes, I agree that teams play us like the Super Bowl. We are the Dallas Cowboys. But in the end, that's not a good enough reason or excuse to say that publicly. You should never go into a game like I'm tired, like I'm ready to go home. Because that's exactly what's going to happen, and it did happen. That's part of the culture and identity that I just feel like we're missing. Like, that's just something like I don't agree with at all. But as soon as playoffs hit, knowing how limited and how hard it is to win in playoff game, I would never say I'm tired or I feel fatigued.
So yeah.
I hate that it paused on Bart Scott's face, or Barf Scott, as JV says. But I'm pausing here because I want y'all to think about what Micah just said. He's essentially talking about D-Law's comments, and he's like, yo, we should never just be too tired to perform in the playoffs. Who can really argue with that? And he said that even if it was the case, even if people were feeling fatigued, he doesn't feel like that's a good enough excuse to mention it out loud, to mention it publicly in response to the question of, why did y'all have the performance y'all had? Who can really argue with that? I don't feel like Micah said anything wrong there. As a matter of fact, everything he said, I think was honest. I think it was the kind of thing that you want to hear. He's acknowledging that, that is not a good excuse. That's not the kind of thing that we should be putting out there in terms of representing the Cowboys brand, in terms of representing the defense. That's not what I want us to be known for. Like, there are other things that led to our poor performance in the playoffs and things that would make for better conversation than saying we're tired. I don't see any problem with what he just said. I feel like if you are a person who wants to defend D-Law, maybe you would. And I do think there are some people like that. Like, when I tweeted what I tweeted about D-Law, there were some people who kind of came at me about it. And I didn't really understand, except that I was like, okay, they want to defend D-Law, but there's really no defending D-Law here. And it's like, if you listen to any Cowboys player, the ones who have been asked about it, none of them are even defending D-Law. They're trying to be respectful, but none of them are like, oh yeah, I'm actually with him on this one. Not a single soul on that team or in that organization has been on D-Law's side or defended those comments. And so when Micah says like, yo, those are not good reasons to not perform, who can really argue with that? However, for some reason, despite Micah saying what I think is the right thing, he took a lot of heat for it here on Get Up.
Yeah, he had an issue with DeMarcus Lawrence saying that the team might have been a little fatigued when they took on Green Bay, and that he said, hey, look, we're the Dallas Cowboys. Everybody plays us. It's like the Super Bowl.
What does that mean? It's the playoffs. Everybody playing hard in the playoffs. This is what I don't understand. Attitude reflects leadership, right? Attitude reflects leadership. Mm-hmm. Who's the leader on that team?
They don't have one. Let's be honest.
Well, is it? Are you going to pay? No, bro. I'm talking on that defensive side because that's who didn't show up. Like, I don't expect Dak to get in defensive players' face and say, not today. If you're going to be that generational player, if you're going to be that Lawrence Taylor player, like, listen, I played around great players.
So I'm going to pause there real quick to talk about his comment about who's the leader on the defense. I do think D-Law is a leader on the defense. I don't think his comment on First Take takes away from that. I look at that as like maybe a slip up or an error, if you will. I don't think that comment is characteristic of D-Law's entire philosophy. And JV, I think it was JV who made this comment real quick, saying, I think D-Law was snitching on DQ, but the players contradict my opinion. If he was, I don't think that the players would come out and say that, because I think that's when you start getting into the political side of things that can sometimes get so tricky and so sticky that it's like, okay, even if you know that's the case, you might not want to dive that deep into it. However, when we did start hearing a little bit of news through the grapevine about what players were saying at the end of the season, there were some people who said, like, yo, some of the defensive players did not like what Dan Quinn was doing. Some of them had lost faith in Dan Quinn. They didn't like the scheme. They were not fans. And it would not surprise me if D-Law was one of those people, simply because we see how physical he is when he's at his best. We see how much ferocity he approaches a game with. We see how competitive he is, right? And so I can see just having a defensive philosophy that allows players to be a little bit more passive, that allows players to kind of shirk responsibility and accountability in terms of some of the comments that some of the players have been making about how they can do things like decide their own stunts. And how they weren't always on the same page, but it was okay. And they were just kind of like going out there and doing what they individually felt like they needed to do. I could see somebody like D-Law taking issue with that. And maybe he couldn't find the right way to say it in the moment. That's totally possible. However, focusing strictly on Micah Parsons, I don't think anything that Micah has said in response to that, or anything that he said in response to Stephen A. Smith's question in that episode, I don't see a problem with any of that. Oh yeah. So to wrap up what I was saying about Bart, like, I do think that D-Law is still a leader. And I actually think what Bart said about the defense not having a leader is more disrespectful than anything Micah Parsons suggested.
That, Michael Parsons is supposed to be that. Ray Lewis ain't letting no team show up and lay no dud. Ed Reed ain't letting no team show up and lay no dud. Darrell Reeves ain't showing up letting nobody lay no dud. He gonna perform and play with such an energy that's gonna make everybody else play. So that's what I'm talking about. He's lacking leadership, right? He doesn't understand what winning in this league is all about. Is he a great player? Yes. But just because you're a great player don't mean you're a great leader. He needs to go to a leader.
Now, I will say right there, I do think Bart Scott is correct in principle. I do think being a great player doesn't make you a great leader. And I do think that Micah Parsons has a lot to learn in terms of what it means to actually being a leader in the league. Like, I think he still has to experience certain things in order to know what it takes to actually win, especially in the postseason. But in terms of him bringing the right amount of energy, like, can anybody say that Micah Parsons doesn't bring enough energy to the game to inspire other players who want to be inspired? Like, that's one thing that I will never accuse Micah Parsons of, is not bringing enough energy to the game. You know what I'm saying? So I think, Bart was like really close to making a good point, but then he got so focused on judging Micah Parsons and kind of negating Micah Parsons' point that he kind of let it all go. But like, in terms of the idea that, like, yes, Micah Parsons being a good player doesn't mean he's going to be a good leader, I do think that's accurate. And so I do think at this point, Micah Parsons is a much better player than he is a leader. But I think the fact that he's willing to take on that leadership role is going to help him in his journey to become a good leader, because in becoming a good leader, I told y'all this echo is distracting. But I think when it comes to leadership, one of the first things that you have to have is the willingness to do it. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of energy. It takes being willing to deal with criticism like this and still staying focused on what your goals are and what your intentions are. And I do think Micah has all those characteristics in place.
Leadership school and learn how to lead by example and quit talking so much and being so damn sensitive. You're a linebacker. That's supposed to be a tough guy spot. He's the most sensitive guy I've ever seen. He responds to everything. Get off of social media, quit tweeting, quit talking about responding, and go about your business, man. That's how you change the culture. That's why Emmitt Smith came out and had something to say. That was directly to you, bro. So instead of responding to what Lauren said, respond to what Emmitt Smith said, and maybe sit down with guys that know what winning is about in this league and take that to heart.
You've run teams. If you had this going on, what would be your attitude?
And so what he just said is one of the examples that I was making about people having a problem with Micah Parsons, yet JP said, I literally felt that eye roll. Good, I'm glad we're here. But yeah, I'm like, how can you say, like, you need to listen to Emmitt Smith? And I'm like, him and Emmitt Smith, when it comes to the culture and the need for discipline, are literally saying the same thing. Like I said, Micah is just willing to actually do something about it. Micah is looking for solutions. And I just haven't heard anything from Emmitt Smith suggesting that he's looking for solutions. And I'm going to dive deeper into Emmitt's comments in a second. We're not going to do a watch along, but I have something to say about Emmitt Smith. But I'm just like, How do you listen to Micah Parsons and listen to Emmitt Smith and have a problem with one but not the other? It simply doesn't make sense. I don't have a problem with what Emmitt Smith is saying. I don't think he's wrong. I just wish he would offer more solutions to people like Micah. But as far as the points that they're making, they sound very similar, and I think they're both right about the culture.
That's your
Yeah,
leader.
you know, Brian, like, I think Tom Brady put it best when he said, well done is better than well said. And we're at a point now, to Bart's point, where there's so much noise around this Cowboy team, and they are so talented that let's put everything down for a year, and let's just get it done on the field, and let's hold each other accountable. And when you're building your roster this time of the year, you're talking about guys that are force multipliers, like a guy like Bart, that's going to help other players get to where we want to go. And sometimes that's putting yourself in a very difficult and uncomfortable position and calling out your teammate about the offseason program, being in
Agreed.
shape, whatever it may be. But instead of talking to the Stephen A. Smiths of the world, let's bring it in-house, let's handle our family business, and let do our talking on the field in January.
What do you think, Rob?
Another guy who was so close to making the right point. He said, instead of talking to the Stephen A. Smiths of the world, let's bring it in-house. But if you listen to what Micah is saying to Stephen A. Smith, he's already talking about his plans to bring it in-house. So I didn't really feel like that criticism was necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that does seem to be something that's missing from this Cowboys team, is that internal leadership, that internal drive. And I think that it might manifest itself in different ways inside the building, but to hear Micah Parsons talking like this, I think gives us license to speculate that not enough of that stuff is going on inside the building. They had some defensive leaders kind of age out over the last few years, and it doesn't seem like they've been replaced with guys that can, that can deliver a kick in the butt. And I do think sometimes that is necessary. They have a culture there that I think is, I mean, they've been very successful in terms of winning games, right? Like, I know they haven't won championships. I know they haven't advanced to the rounds of the playoffs they want to, but they're obviously good, right? So the question is, what elevates them beyond good to where they actually want to be? And I do think the young stars on the team, Micah, we see what he is. CeeDee Lamb is kind of a quiet guy, right, on the offense. I don't think he's going to be screaming in teammates' faces and all that. So I do think there needs to be some level of development of that, whether it's those guys, whether it's somebody we're not even talking about over the next year or so for Dallas.
Do they need?
All right, so that's pretty much enough of that. They do go further for a little bit, but we don't really need to discuss it any more than that. But here's my thing. So one, I'm going to go backwards. He talked about CeeDee and how CeeDee won't be screaming in people's faces. He might not. That doesn't seem to be his style. But what's interesting when people talk about CeeDee and his comments about leadership is that when it comes to CeeDee Lamb, and one day I'm going to make a video just for this because I love CeeDee Lamb. But when it comes to CeeDee Lamb, everything that he's ever said he wants to do in the league, he's done it. He's done it. He said he was going to get better in terms of the drop passes. He did it. He said he was going to get better at route running. Said he was going to get better at yak. He did it. He said he was going to get better at blocking. He did it. He said he was going to get to the point where he could line up all over the field. He did it. He said he was going to get better at being on the same page with Dak and understanding the plays. He did it. So why is it that literally everything he says he's going to do, he does? He's evolved so much since he first came into the league. Like, if you're really paying attention to CeeDee Lamb, he's evolved so much as a teammate and as a player. Yet when it comes to him saying, I want to be more of a leader, I want to do more to help set the tone in terms of culture, I want to help Dak out when it comes to that, why is it all of a sudden people don't believe him? I don't understand. And we literally have no reason not to believe him. Like, even the fact that he went on Micah's podcast and talked with him for 45 minutes, a large part of that conversation being about the culture, about the need for leadership, about what he wants to do in terms of being a leader, that's something he would have never done before. We never saw him do interviews that long before, not going that in depth about the team, We saw him do little things for like Old Spice that he's paid to do. Old Spice is one of his endorsers / sponsors or whatever. He has some kind of deal with them. But as far as like volunteering to go on any sort of media platform and just talk about the team. And yes, it was Micah. So yes, that was kind of like a soft entry into that world of making public statements. But it's still different actions on the part of CeeDee Lamb. So I'm like, we're already seeing somewhat of a change in his approach to how he wants to be perceived and how he wants his voice to be heard in terms of when it comes to Cowboys matters. So I just don't understand this disbelief when it comes to the idea of CeeDee Lamb being a leader. Now, as far as Micah goes and what they were saying about Micah Parsons, I really do think that they all got so close. Like the last person who talked said something about the need for leadership in house. And I really do believe that that's what Micah is trying to do. Like it's the off season just started. They haven't really gotten to the point where he's going to implement a lot of those things. But at the end of the day, yes, I do think that guy was right in the sense that I know I just said that there is leadership on the defense, but in terms of the type of leadership that could give somebody a kick in the butt, like what he described, I'm not going to say that it was lacking. I'm going to say that it was counteracted. And here's what I mean by that. You might be, as a player, the type of leader who can, really get on dudes and really try to hold them accountable. But if there is a stronger force that counteracts that, in other words, if the people above you, like coaches, like coordinators, are not reinforcing that culture, a lot of the actions that you try to take are going to be canceled out and counteracted. That's just how things go. And so I think it's very possible that that's something that happened, especially whenever you really listen to Micah and CeeDee talk about some of the things that they observed. Like Micah specifically, when he talked about the fact that there were things that they needed to work on, but because they kept winning, it kind of kept getting brushed under the rug. How does that happen if you have coaches reinforcing the message that those things are important week after week, practice after practice? The only way that that happens is if coaches are letting it happen, is if you're going into position meetings, is if you're going into film watching sessions, if you're going into practices and it's being kind of reinforced that, yeah, these things are important, but we're winning. We're doing great in spite of not being great at these things. Like, how could all these players go into a setting where you have coaches and coordinators saying, like, no, we really need to learn these things. We really need to get better at this. This is a priority right now, but yet it somehow just doesn't happen. I feel like there's no way it happens unless the coaches are letting that happen. So even if you did have players in-house saying, hey, we need to get better at this, we need to do this, you need to be doing this, if you don't have the people who are above you, the people who are actually in charge of things like consequences and rewards and which culture prevails, reinforcing that message, it can all get canceled out. And I think it's very possible that that's what happened. And I think maybe that's why Micah is like, no, we need to be tougher despite what else might be going on in terms of what the staff is doing. We as players are going to have to be even tougher on each other if we want to make sure that this culture prevails, despite how lackadaisical other people who are on staff, other people who are in charge might be. That's just my perspective. I know there's a good bit of speculation in there, but I'm just trying to put things together and make them make sense. That's all I'm trying to do. But yeah, that's why I'm really getting frustrated about the criticism of Micah Parsons, because I really do feel like his heart is in the right place, his actions are in the right place. And I think instead of them telling Micah to be quiet and telling him he needs to sit down with other players who can help him, I really do think we would have better results if we asked people like Emmitt Smith to be a little bit more active, to be a little bit more involved, to offer actual solutions. Because right now they're all in public doing the same thing. And if I were someone in the position of Emmitt Smith, I would hear Micah saying, hey, I want to change the culture, and maybe reach out to him and be like, okay, how do you plan on doing that? You've only been in the league for so many years. You've only experienced so much. Like, maybe we should have some conversations about how this might go. And I feel like that might be effective. But speaking of Emmitt Smith, the main thing that I was going to say about his comments recently is that the biggest issue I have with what he's saying, despite the fact that besides the fact, I should say, that he's not offering actual solutions, is the fact that the timing of it all, I'm not a fan of. And here's what I mean. I really think when it comes to going all in, the Joneses aren't going to go all in unless they get another general manager. Anything else, in my opinion, is them falling short of going all in. And so to hear Emmitt Smith come out and say about Jerry Jones, that's my owner. Jerry Jones is not your owner, dude. Like, you've been out the league a long time. And the fact that he looks at Jerry Jones as still refers to Jerry Jones as his owner, is kind of weird to me. I'm going to be honest. It's kind of weird. And so you're out here not criticizing the guy who's been in charge for decades, the guy who has the power to get another general manager in the building. You're not addressing the Joneses' role in the Cowboys falling short of their goal of getting to the Super Bowl at all. not addressing personnel issues, not talking about where the roster is falling short, not talking about, some of the games that the Joneses have played in terms of turning the public against players, turning players against one another, playing these games in terms of public perception of what the salary cap is and what it means. Like, he didn't address that at all and refers to Jerry Jones as his owner. But then you're going to denigrate players who are literally publicly saying that they're trying to do their best. And you're denigrating these players at a time when their contract extensions and renegotiations and future earnings are on the table. So it really feels like some very anti-player, pro-owner rhetoric at a really inconvenient time for CeeDee Lamb, Dak Prescott, and Micah Parsons in particular. And for that to come from a former player, it sits so wrong with me. It's super, super weird. Like, I don't like anti-player rhetoric from anybody anyway, but for that to come from another player against not only other players, against other Cowboys, and for him to not only kind of talk about them in a way that could impact public perception, like not in a way that benefits them at a time when they're trying to negotiate really important contracts, but then you're like sucking up to Jerry Jones at the same time. It's just really gross behavior to me. And like, while I respect Emmitt Smith as an athlete, like I need him to either be honest about everybody or just kind of shut up for a while. Cause I'm like, we've heard your opinion on the players. We get it. They lack discipline, like what we referred to in the last episode. So we get it. You don't like how the team looks. Nobody likes how they looked in the playoffs, so on and so forth. But I'm just like, if you're not going to address everything, just kind of leave it alone. I see a few comments coming in. Let's see. JV says, everyone give themselves $700,000 plus every single week for 4 months a year in their early 20s for a minimum 4 years. How would you act? You acted worse for way less. Facts. These young men are amazing. Mark says, now this is where I disagree. Why does the front office get blamed for the players' lack of passion to win this year's team? I need punctuation. This year's team is a perfect example of it's time for players to step up flat out. Mark, you're not wrong. It is time for players to step up. But I don't think either side deserves to be free of blame. But we've talked so much about the need for players to step up, and I don't think we've talked enough about what the front office needs to do. And by that, I mean, we kind of talked earlier. I don't know if you were here. We kind of talked earlier about how the Cowboys of the 90s had a lot of cultural issues. There were a lot of distractions, but they were able to put their roster together in a way that still ensured wins. And despite all the things that happened this year, if the Dallas Cowboys had an actual run game, if the Dallas Cowboys had actual linebackers, not converted safeties who are trying to figure this shit out and who are just honestly not built for it on any level, but if they had actual linebackers, right? If they had players who are actually on the same page on defense, not everybody like calling their own stunts randomly. If they had just those three things in place, we might have seen different results and we might be talking very differently about the culture of the organization, right? So while we can talk about the culture and the need for discipline all day, let's not act like some different roster and personnel decisions and some different scheme decisions wouldn't have made huge, huge differences. So I think from that perspective, there's room to address all of it. There's room to address the coaches, the owners, and the players. But for some reason, everybody's so focused on the players and not even just how they performed, but trying to analyze these guys' mindsets and their philosophy towards the game and doing it in a very negative way. And I just think if we're going to analyze their mindset, why are we not analyzing the same mindset that's led to them not having a general manager for the past several decades? And here's another reason why that's so important. And I didn't realize people didn't know this until I tweeted this and somebody was like, I didn't know that. The salary cap was not instituted until 1994. Here, I'm gonna look it up and just make sure I get these numbers right. So the free agency system was introduced on March 1st, 1993. The NFL salary cap was introduced, I know it was in 94. I don't think I have an exact date, but it was introduced in 1994. And those two things went hand in hand. There was a, I'm gonna see if I can look it up real quick because I want to make sure I get this terminology right. There was a sort of free agency in place I can't think of the name of it. I want to say they called it Plan B free agency. So if you're following along in your textbooks, no, you can Google the term Plan B free agency and you'll probably read a little bit about it. But essentially, it was this idea that NFL teams had limited, was it limited rights? They had a certain level of rights to retain 37 players on their roster and not give those players the right to sign with another team until they had an opportunity to do it first. So we're not talking about one franchise tag. We're talking about 37 players on the roster. And then there was all this stuff in place to where it's like if another team did take one player's team, they had to kind of like honor numbers that were discussed and weird things. And some teams just couldn't afford that. So the free agency system and the salary cap were instituted around the same time, basically to honor what the NFLPA was trying to do in terms of them saying that the way free agency was being handled wasn't fair. And they also wanted more of a competitive balance because teams that were like really bankrolled, like the Dallas Cowboys, were able to afford a lot better talent and a lot more talent than other teams that weren't in markets that really could sustain that. And so I'm like, does anybody really think that it's a coincidence that around the same time free agency and a salary cap were instituted, all of a sudden the Cowboys just stopped winning Super Bowls? Like, no, that's not a coincidence. The way you put a team together has been different ever since. And the Joneses are good at spending money. They're good at spotting talent and making offers that talent cannot refuse. But when you have to start negotiating a little bit, when you have to start structuring contracts in creative ways so that everything fits, that's where they have a problem. That's not their strength. It's not their forte. And so that's why I keep saying they need to bring a general manager in. It's not that I have anything against Jerry Jones. As a businessman and as an owner, I think he's done phenomenal things. But when it comes to putting the team together, I just don't think it's enough of his strength for him to just keep taking stabs at it like this. And let's think about it this way, right? Let's think about it this way. If we had, if you knew somebody who had car problems, and they were like, I'm gonna do everything to fix this car. I'm gonna do everything I can. And you were like, good, because like you keep saying you're gonna give me a ride and you never show up to give me a ride. And they're like, yeah, it's because the car keeps messing up and I'm gonna do everything to fix it. And you're like, well, what are you gonna do to fix it? And they said, well, I'm gonna change the tires on it. And you're like, yeah, but the problem is that the car won't start. Why are you changing tires on it? And they were like, I don't know, but that's what I'm gonna try. Car obviously still doesn't work. And you're like, okay, take the car to a mechanic, please. And they were like, well, instead of taking it to a mechanic, what if I call my friend who fixed his own car and see what he says? And it's like, okay, if they don't take it to a mechanic, you're going to be like, okay, you're not really doing everything that you can to fix this car, right? And I feel like that's kind of where the Joneses are with the Cowboys. They're like, oh yeah, we're going all in. You're going to go all in, but you won't hire a general manager. So are you really going all in, or are you going as all in as you're comfortable going? Hey, Vachi. Good to see you. So that's what I mean whenever I say I don't believe the Cowboys are going all in. And that's what I mean when I say that's what I think they need to do to go all in. Now, that brings us to this topic of Jimmy Johnson and this whole he's on the advisory board situation. I'm going to get to y'all's comments in a second. I will. But one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this is because I saw people talk about, Jimmy Johnson is on the advisory board, like things are going to be different now. And so I feel the need to set the record straight a little bit. Now, if you've been watching me for a long time, there's a lot of times I like to dive into headlines and kind of point out that this headline doesn't mean what you think it means. And this, unfortunately, Cowboys Nation is one of those headlines. So where this is coming from is that Jimmy Johnson made an appearance on the Joe Rowe Show on WQAM 560 AM in Miami. And he made a comment about being on Jerry Jones's advisory board. Now, the Joe Rowe Show, for anyone who's interested, it is available on Odyssey, but their episodes get uploaded about a day later. So we might not be able to actually hear the audio from this until like tomorrow. But a couple of news outlets did write some quotes from this. So here's one of the quotes. Jimmy Johnson said, everything is hunky-dory now. He's referring to since the Ring of Honor celebration. He said, I am back in the fold with the Cowboys. He went on to say, I'm scrolling here. He said, we went on to say we were talking on the phone for about an hour after his Green Bay playoff loss, and he was talking about what all he needed to do. because he had big decisions on Mike McCarthy and Dan Quinn and Dak Prescott. So that's essentially all we know. What I'm saying here is this is not an official hiring. So even as a consultant, Jimmy Johnson has not actually been hired. The quotes that were, in my opinion, taken out of context in order to make these headlines that have appeared on CBS Sports and other places, they were made in reference to his comments about him having a good talk with Jerry Jones and about the fact that apparently that didn't happen before the Ring of Honor celebration. So Jimmy Johnson himself is saying, hey, we had this good talk, so I'm back in the fold now. I'm on his advisory board. He's basically saying, like, Jerry Jones asked me for advice and I gave it to him. And so I want y'all to be educated. I want y'all to be smart. I don't want y'all to be these people out here tweeting that Jimmy Johnson is on the staff with the Dallas Cowboys. And honestly, he's not. And if I go to CBS Sports and the article that they wrote about it, and it's pretty much the same exact quotes. So a lot of people were using the CBS Sports headlines as like proof that this was a legit story. But fact of the matter is they were saying some of the same things. So yes, it's on CBS Sports, but they're not really saying anything different. They have the exact same quote and no evidence that Jimmy Johnson is actually in a paid position. No evidence that he's actually making any decisions in terms of the roster. Now, might he still be giving advice to Jerry Jones about the roster? That's very possible. But going back to my car example from a minute ago, that's still, in my opinion, the equivalent of somebody calling a mechanic and asking for advice, as opposed to being like, you know what, I'm gonna take this car to the shop and let a mechanic handle this. In my opinion, that would be an example of the Joneses going all in, would be them allowing a general manager to take charge of this roster and get the personnel that we need, instead of being like, okay, I'll listen to people who might know better than me, but I'm gonna decide if I'm actually comfortable taking that advice, regardless of how good people say it is. So that's kind of the frustrating thing about where the Joneses are. Now, considering the fan response to this news, who knows? They might, do a little something and actually make Jimmy Johnson a consultant, kind of in the same way that Schottenheimer was a consultant, not this past season, but the one before in 2022. And maybe he will have enough influence to at least influence the culture we've been talking so much about, if not the actual roster and personnel. I do think that would be better than nothing, but I don't think that's the same thing as going all in. So I do have to run in a few minutes. I want to look at a few of y'all's comments. So if y'all have any questions about anything, I know I kind of ran through the last few things that we discussed. But like I said, we are going to talk about this more tomorrow, because I want to do a deep dive into Stephen A. Smith's conversation with Micah Parsons. And if y'all noticed in that clip from Get Up, they were like, oh yeah, Micah Parsons talked about the comments that D-Law made, but they didn't address the fact that Micah Parsons completely owned Stephen A. Smith when it came to their Dak Prescott debate. Yeah, they aren't going to talk about that on ESPN. But let's see, what comments do we have? Mark Smith said, if people complaining about Zimmer being too old, Johnson is older than Zimmer. If the game has passed Zimmer by now, I told you I need punctuation. We're going to work on this, Mark. We're going to work on the punctuation thing. How is Johnson getting a pass? His years outside of Dallas wasn't great. Love him, though. You're not wrong in that. I think a lot of people, when they think of Jimmy Johnson, obviously they're thinking of the glory years. So they're assuming that Jimmy Johnson will have better advice for Jerry Jones than what they've actually been receiving. Dom says, LMAO, they'll never let Stephen A. look like a fool. Yeah, it does sound like he kind of runs things on some level at ESPN. Once again, shout out to the one and only Mr. Vach Lombardi. Thank you for showing up. And he says, y'all notice how consistent Jazz. Thank you so much for noticing, Vachi. I appreciate that. And let's look at a couple more. Mark also said, it's because players are more worried about getting paid instead of winning championships, especially the quarterback position. They have crippled teams as far as putting a championship team together. Mark, me and you gonna fight, honestly. I don't think they're more worried about being paid than winning championships. I think that's a narrative that people are putting out there to find something to blame. For example, CeeDee Lamb, he made one comment during that conversation with Micah Parsons about making millions. He mentioned winning a Super Bowl 3 times at least, maybe 4. But for some reason, people aren't putting an emphasis on that. There is not a single person in the Dallas Cowboys organization, in the NFL, or anywhere involved in professional football who is doing this shit for free. So if the Joneses are going to sit here and make billions from these players putting their bodies on the line and winning rings, then what's wrong with players wanting millions for doing it? I don't see the problem, because even without the rings, Jerry Jones is still a fucking billionaire. So if CD says, I want to be a millionaire because I'm putting my body on the line, because I'm dedicating my time to this, because I'm allowing this organization to use my name, image, and likeness, and that's how Jerry Jones is getting his billions, so I want a cut of that, and I want a decent cut of that, more props to him. What the fuck do we expect? Are we serious? Come on now. Sorry, like, y'all frustrate me with like all this anti-player shit. Like, yes, let these players get paid. Jesus. And yes, they do want to win championships. It's not like they aren't out here saying it. Come on now. JV, and this will probably be my last one because I gotta run. JV said, Jazz, why doesn't it feel our concerns are being asked? Because I would be straightforward with my question. Why are you running TV inside instead of on the outside? JV, I do not know. And that is a question I was asking week after week, as we said, because when he did run to the outside, we saw so much success there, didn't we? Like, I don't know. That's all I got for you there, man. It is 7:56. I gotta run. Maybe I'll think on that, and we'll talk about it tomorrow when we talk about these comments that Micah is making about the culture, and when we maybe get some audio of what Jimmy Johnson actually said in terms to this advisory board situation. I'm going to check in with my connections who are a little bit closer to the team just to be sure. But as far as I know, this is not an actual hire. No sources have said it is. So y'all just be smart out here in these Twitter streets while y'all are having these conversations. But thank y'all for tuning in, for being active in the chat. Thank you so much for the love. I'll see y'all tomorrow. Keep those notifications on and we'll do it again. On that note, this is another episode of Bitches Love Sports. I'm Jazz Monet and I'm out.